The stars around Kepler Station had been burning for 6 days now, but these were not the gentle lights that guided ships home. These fires came from exploding metal and dying dreams, painting the void in colors that no one should ever have to see. Commander Zara pressed her blue-scaled hand against the thick glass of the observation deck and watched another defense platform die in a brilliant flash that hurt her eyes even through the protective filters. The syndicate ships moved like hungry predators circling wounded prey. Their black hulls seemed to eat the starlight itself, and their weapons carved through space with the precision of surgeons cutting into flesh. Zara had seen many battles in her 30 years of service, but nothing like this. The enemy had brought enough firepower to crack a moon, and they were using every bit of it against her station. "Commander, the outer ring is gone," Lieutenant Crix reported from his position at the sensor station. His voice carried the weight of defeat that comes when good soldiers realize they are about to die for nothing. 17 platforms destroyed. The miners are asking if they should evacuate the extraction sites. Zara turned away from the window and walked back to the center of the command room. The holographic display showed their situation in harsh blue light. 53 enemy ships surrounded them in a perfect sphere of death. Every escape route was blocked. Every hiding place was watched. The syndicate had planned this attack with the kind of care that spoke of months of preparation. "Tell the miners to pull back to the inner stations," she ordered, "and send word to all department heads. I want a full briefing in 20 minutes. Jake Morrison stood near the engineering console studying damage reports on his tablet. He was the only human on Kepler Station, which made him something of a curiosity among the mixed crew of aliens who called this place home. At 42, he had spent most of his adult life in space, moving from one mining operation to another as humanity slowly built its presence among the stars. "How bad is it, Jake?" Zara asked him directly. She had learned to value his practical approach to problems, even if his species was still considered junior members of the Galactic Coalition. Jake looked up from his tablet and met her eyes. "Bad enough. The syndicate brought heavy cruisers this time. Our shields won't hold against another bombardment like the last one. Maybe 6 hours if we're lucky. Maybe 2 if we're not." The command room fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of weapons fire. 12,000 people lived on this station. 12,000 beings from 17 different worlds who had come here seeking honest work and a peaceful life among the rings of a gas giant so far from home that most of them would never see their birth worlds again. "What about coalition reinforcements?" asked Captain Vorth of the Crixian Defense Corps. His reptilian features showed the kind of calm that comes before a last stand. "The distress signal went out 4 days ago." Zara shook her head slowly. "The nearest coalition fleet is 3 sectors away, fighting syndicate forces near the Rigel system. Even if they left immediately, they wouldn't arrive for 2 weeks. We're on our own." The truth of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. On their own, 12,000 souls against 53 warships that could turn their home into scrap metal and memories. Jake thought about the children in the education section, learning mathematics and literature from teachers who had volunteered to bring civilization to this distant outpost. He thought about the families in the residential quarters, probably sitting around dinner tables right now trying to pretend everything would be fine. "There might be another option," Jake said quietly. "I've been looking at the evacuation protocols. If we time it right, we could get maybe half the population off the station before they close the gap." "Half," Zara repeated, tasting the word like poison. "And the other half?" "The other half stays behind to keep the station running and buy time for the escape pods to reach minimum safe distance." Dr. Lisa Chen entered the command room at that moment, her medical uniform stained with the blue blood of injured Velani workers. She had been treating casualties from the platform explosions, and her face showed the exhaustion that comes from trying to heal wounds that keep getting deeper. "I heard about the evacuation plan," she said without preamble. "I volunteered to stay. The wounded can't be moved safely, and someone needs to keep the medical bay running." "Lisa, no," Jake started to say, but she cut him off with a look that could have stopped a charging bull. "This isn't a discussion. Jake, these people need medical care and I'm the senior physician. End of story." Outside the station, the syndicate ships had stopped firing for the moment. Their commanders were probably planning their next move, deciding how much damage they were willing to inflict before they tried to board and take control. The rare minerals in Kepler's rings were worth a fortune, but only if the mining equipment remained intact enough to extract them. They want the station operational, Zara realized out loud. That's why they haven't just blown us apart. They need our facilities, Jake nodded grimly, which means they'll try to take us alive if possible. But if we resist too much, they'll decide the minerals aren't worth the trouble and turn us into space dust. The holographic display updated itself with new sensor data. The enemy ships were moving again, repositioning themselves into what looked like a boarding formation. Long-range scanners showed dozens of assault shuttles being prepared in their landing bays. 6 hours until they're in position, Lieutenant Crix reported. Maybe less. Zara made the hardest decision of her military career. She opened the station-wide communication channel and spoke in the clear, calm voice that had earned her command of this outpost. Attention all residents of Kepler Station. This is Commander Velton. We are beginning immediate evacuation procedures for all non-essential personnel. Report to your designated assembly points and await further instructions. This is not a drill. The words echoed through corridors and living quarters, through workshops and recreation areas, through all the spaces where ordinary people had built ordinary lives in the extraordinary darkness between the stars. Soon those corridors would be filled with the sounds of families gathering their most precious possessions and saying, "Goodbye to everything else, Jake." Watched the evacuation status board as green lights began turning yellow, then red. Each light represented a group of people moving through the station toward the escape pod bays. Each light was a small victory against the darkness closing in around them. "Think any of them will make it?" he asked quietly. Zara looked out at the stars again, at the enemy ships waiting in the night like patient wolves. Some will. Some have to. The escape pods launched like seeds scattered into a hurricane. Dr. Lisa Chen watched from the medical bay window as the first wave of refugees streaked away from Kepler Station, their small engines burning bright against the darkness. Each pod carried 30 people toward an uncertain future, but at least it was a future that might last longer than the next few hours. 3 days had passed since the evacuation began, and hope was dying as slowly and painfully as everything else on the station. The syndicate ships had allowed the first pods to escape, probably because their commanders wanted to see where they would go. Now the enemy formation had tightened like a noose, and every sensor reading showed weapons locked onto the remaining escape routes. "How many more can we get out?" Jake Morrison asked as he helped load another group of civilians into Pod Bay 7. His mining uniform was torn and stained with coolant from the damaged life support systems, but his hands remained steady as he checked each person's emergency gear. Amy Rodriguez, one of the human teachers from the education section, was saying goodbye to a group of young Villani children she had taught for 2 years. Their parents had already gone in an earlier pod, trusting their most precious treasures to strangers because there was no other choice. "Be brave, little ones," Amy whispered in broken Villani as she helped them into their seats. "Remember what we learned about the old Earth stories. Sometimes help comes when you least expect it." The children looked at her with the kind of trust that breaks hearts, their large eyes reflecting the red emergency lighting that had become the only illumination on most of the station. They believed her because children have to believe that adults know what they are doing, even when those adults are making everything up as they go along. Jake sealed the pod bay and watched another 30 souls rocket away from the station. That made 4,000 people safely away, but 8,000 remained. The mathematics were brutal and simple. At this rate, they would run out of time long before they ran out of people. "The syndicate is moving again," Lieutenant Crix announced over the communication system. His voice had grown hoarse from 3 days of constant reports, each one worse than the last. "They're bringing up their boarding ships." In the command center, Commander Zara studied the tactical display with the intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. The enemy had positioned their heavy cruisers in a perfect sphere around the station, with smaller attack ships filling every gap. It was a formation designed by someone who understood military strategy better than she did, which was saying something. Captain Vorth limped into the command center, his left arm in a medical brace from when a power conduit had exploded near his quarters. The tough Crixian had refused to evacuate with the other wounded, claiming that his duty was to the station and everyone still aboard it. "My government has sent word through quantum relay," he reported grimly. "The Crixian fleet cannot reach us in time. Neither can the Villani ships or anyone else from the coalition. We are truly alone." The weight of those words settled over everyone present like a physical force. Alone meant that whatever happened next would be decided by the people in this room, with no reinforcements coming and no miracle rescues from the void. Just ordinary beings trying to save as many lives as possible before the darkness claimed them all. Dr. Chen joined them after finishing her rounds in the medical bay. Her face showed the exhaustion that comes from treating injuries that keep getting worse while supplies run dangerously low. The wounded from the platform explosions were stable for now, but several would die without proper medical facilities that existed only on Coalition worlds weeks away. The Syndicate sent a message, she reported quietly. They want to talk. Zara looked up from the tactical display with surprise. In 3 days of siege, the enemy had communicated only through weapons fire and position changes. Now they wanted to negotiate, which could mean opportunity or trap in equal measure. Put them through, she ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Syndicate heavy cruiser. The man who appeared was tall and pale, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. His uniform was perfectly clean despite 3 days of battle, which told everyone everything they needed to know about his character. Commander Velton, the Syndicate captain said in accented Galactic standard. I am Captain Marsh of the Syndicate vessel Dark Star. I believe we should discuss terms. Terms for what? Zara replied coldly. For your surrender, of course. You have fought bravely, but this siege has gone on long enough. High superiors grow impatient with the delay. Jake stepped closer to the screen, studying the enemy commander with the careful attention he usually reserved for dangerous mining equipment. What are you offering? Captain Marsh's smile grew wider and somehow less pleasant. Safe passage for your remaining civilians. My people need this station operational, which means we need some of your technical staff alive. Cooperate fully, and the non-essential personnel can leave unharmed. And if we refuse? Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. Then we take the station by force and sort out the survivors afterward. I estimate perhaps 10% would survive the boarding action. 20% if you're very lucky. The command center fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitoring systems and the distant hum of recycling air. Outside the windows, the Syndicate ships waited with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Amy Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom from the pod bays. Commander, we have a problem down here. The children's pod bay is sealed. The launch mechanism is damaged from the last bombardment. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many children? 43. Ages 4 to 16. Mixed species. They're scared but trying to be brave. Dr. Chen closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with the look of someone who had just made a terrible decision. I'll stay with them. Whatever happens, they shouldn't be alone. Captain Marsh was still smiling on the screen, waiting for their answer like a man who had all the time in the world. Behind him, Jake could see other Syndicate officers preparing boarding equipment and weapons that would turn the station's corridors into slaughterhouses. You have 30 minutes to decide, Marsh continued pleasantly. After that, we begin boarding operations whether you cooperate or not. I do hope you'll make the sensible choice. The screen went dark, leaving the command center bathed in the red glow of emergency lighting. 30 minutes to choose between surrender and massacre, between slavery and death, between hope and the cold mathematics of survival. Zara looked around the room at the faces of people who had become family over years of shared danger and small victories. Jake, the steady engineer, Lisa, the dedicated doctor, Vorth, the loyal soldier, Amy, the caring teacher, and dozens of others who had made this distant outpost into something worth defending. Opinions? She asked quietly. We fight, Jake said without hesitation. These people came here for a better life. They deserve better than Syndicate slavery. The children can't defend themselves, Dr. Chen added. Someone has to stand between them and that. Captain Vorth straightened his injured arm and managed something that might have been a smile. It has been an honor serving with all of you. Outside the station, the Syndicate ships began moving into final position, their weapons charging for what everyone knew would be the last battle. The quantum communication array had been quiet for hours when it suddenly burst to life with a signal so strong it made Communications Officer Danny Pierce jump back from his console. The young man had been monitoring emergency frequencies for days, hoping against hope that someone would answer their desperate calls for help. Now something was coming through the void, and it was not what anyone expected. Commander Velton to communications immediately, Danny called over the intercom, his voice cracking with excitement and disbelief. His hands shook as he worked to clean up the incoming signal, adjusting frequencies and filters to cut through the interference that came from operating so close to a gas giant's magnetic field. Zara arrived at a run, followed closely by Jake Morrison and Dr. Chen. They had been preparing for the syndicate boarding action that was now less than 15 minutes away, distributing weapons to anyone who could hold them and setting up defensive positions throughout the station. The idea that help might actually be coming seemed impossible after so many days of silence. "What do you have, Danny?" Zara asked as she slid into the chair beside him. The young communications officer pointed at his screens with trembling fingers. "Long-range signal from the edge of the system. Coalition frequency, but the encryption is different, more advanced than anything I've seen before." Jake leaned over Danny's shoulder to study the readouts. The signal strength was enormous, suggesting either very powerful transmitters or something much closer than the readings indicated. Either possibility was interesting, but neither made much sense given what they knew about coalition forces in this sector. "Can you decode it?" Zara asked. "Already working on it," Danny replied, his fingers flying over the controls with the speed that came from years of training and desperation. The message was short when it finally came through clear, displayed in standard galactic text on the main screen. "Kepler Station, this is USV Defender. Hold position. Help is coming." The command center fell completely silent. USV meant United Systems vessel, which was the designation used by human ships. But no human vessel should be anywhere near the Kepler system, and certainly not one with the capability to challenge 53 syndicate warships. USV Defender. Zara spoke into the communication system, her voice steady despite the wild hope that was beginning to build in her chest. "This is Commander Velton of Kepler Station. We are under siege by syndicate forces. 53 enemy vessels in attack formation. Our situation is desperate." The response came back immediately as if the mysterious ship had been waiting for exactly that question. "Understood, Kepler Station. Maintain current defensive posture. We will handle the rest." Captain Vorth had arrived during the exchange, and he was staring at the display with the expression of someone who had just been told the laws of physics were optional. His military experience told him that one ship against 53 was not a battle but a massacre waiting to happen. "One vessel," he said aloud. "Against the entire syndicate task force? This is impossible. What kind of ship do humans possess that could challenge such odds?" Jake could only shake his head in confusion. He knew the official records of human military capability as well as anyone. Earth had a handful of destroyers and frigates. Decent ships, but nothing special compared to the major coalition fleets. The idea that humanity had been hiding something powerful enough to take on a syndicate battle group was beyond belief. "Danny, can you get a visual on this defender?" Dr. Chen asked. The young man worked frantically at his controls, switching between long-range sensors and optical telescopes, trying to get a clear image of whatever was approaching them. The readings were confusing and contradictory, showing energy signatures that did not match any known ship class in the Coalition database. "I'm getting massive energy readings from the edge of the system," Danny reported, his voice filled with awe. "The power output is off the charts. It's bigger than anything I've ever seen." Through the command center windows, they could see the syndicate ships beginning to react to the newcomer. Their perfect formation was shifting as captains received new orders and tried to position themselves to face this unexpected threat. For the first time in days, confusion rippled through their ranks instead of the cold confidence they had shown since the siege. Began. Amy Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom from the children's section where she had stayed to comfort the young ones who could not be evacuated. "Commander, the children are asking what's happening. They can feel the station shaking differently." "Tell them help is coming," Zara replied, though she was not sure she believed it herself. "Tell them to be brave for just a little longer." The proximity alarm suddenly activated throughout the station, as every sensor registered something appearing at the edge of the Kepler system. Whatever was coming had just dropped out of hyperspace with enough energy to light up detection grids across 3 sectors. The readings were so intense that several of Danny's screens flickered and reset themselves. "Visual contact," Danny announced, his voice barely above a whisper. The main screen shifted to show a long-range view of the system's edge, where space itself seemed to be bending around something enormous. At first it was just a distortion against the stars, but as the sensors adjusted and focused, the shape of a ship began to emerge from the darkness. It was massive beyond anything they had ever seen. 2 kilometers long and bristling with weapon systems that defied identification, the human vessel looked less like a ship and more like a floating fortress designed by someone who had decided, that there was no such thing as too much firepower. Its hull was a dark gray that seemed to absorb light, and energy patterns danced along its surface like controlled lightning. "That's impossible," Captain Vorth breathed. "No human ship has capabilities like that." Jake stared at the display in shock. He had grown up believing that humanity was the junior member of the Galactic Coalition, grateful to have been accepted among the more advanced species who ruled the stars. The idea that his own people had been building something like this in secret was beyond his ability to understand. "USV Defender," Zara called over the communication system. "We can see you now. That is an impressive vessel." The response came back with what sounded almost like amusement. "Thank you, Commander. We've been looking forward to field testing her. Please maintain safe distance and prepare to receive evacuees. This will be over shortly." Dr. Chen gripped Jake's arm as they watched the impossible human ship begin to move toward the Syndicate fleet. "Jake, what did your people build?" Before he could answer, the Syndicate ships opened fire. 53 vessels unleashed everything they had in a coordinated barrage that should have turned any ship in the galaxy into expanding gas and metal fragments. The energy weapons lit up space like a new star being born. And for a moment, the human vessel disappeared completely in the brilliant light. When the light faded, the Defender was still there, completely unharmed and moving forward with the steady confidence of something that had just proven it could not be stopped. The real battle was about to begin. The human warship moved through space like death itself had learned to fly. Captain Rick Stone stood on the bridge of the USV Defender, watching the Syndicate fleet scramble to respond to his arrival. At 55 years old, he had seen enough battles to know when an enemy was about to make a fatal mistake, and the Syndicate commanders were lining up to make the biggest one of their lives. 53 enemy vessels confirmed, reported Lieutenant Commander Beth Adams from her position at the tactical station. Her voice carried the calm professionalism that came from years of training in Earth's secret deep space program. "They're moving into attack formation, but they look confused. I don't think they know what they're dealing with." Stone allowed himself a small smile as he studied the tactical display. The Syndicate ships were spreading out in a pattern designed to overwhelm a single target through concentrated firepower. But their formations were based on fighting coalition vessels with known capabilities and limitations. They had no idea what human engineering could accomplish when it was allowed to work without restrictions. "Let them come," he said quietly. "Communications, open a channel to Kepler Station." The main screen showed the face of Commander Velton, her alien features displaying a mixture of hope and disbelief that Stone had seen many times before. Most species in the galaxy had grown comfortable with the idea that humans were useful, but unremarkable members of the Coalition, happy to provide raw materials and basic support, while the more advanced races handled the serious business of interstellar politics. "USV Defender. I must ask again," the Velani commander said. "How is this possible? Human ships in the Coalition database do not have this level of capability." Stone's smile widened slightly. "The human ships you know about don't, Commander. We've been busy while everyone else was fighting their wars. How many people are still on your station?" 8,000, including civilians and children who cannot be evacuated." "Copy that. We'll have you out of there in 30 minutes. On Kepler Station, Jake Morrison stared at the display showing the approaching battle. The human ship was outnumbered more than 50 to 1, facing odds that should have been mathematically impossible to survive. Yet something in Captain Stone's voice suggested he was not concerned about the numbers, as if he knew something that the Syndicate fleet had not yet figured out. "Sir," Lieutenant Adams announced, "the Syndicate ships are charging all weapons. They're preparing for a coordinated strike." Stone nodded calmly. "Shields up. Weapons free. All hands prepare for combat." The Defender's defensive systems came online with a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the entire ship. What appeared on the external sensors was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the familiar blue energy barriers used by Coalition forces, the human ship surrounded itself with something that looked like liquid mercury, flowing around the hull in impossible patterns. "What in the name of the void is that?" Captain Vorth whispered from the station's command center. The Syndicate fleet opened fire at exactly the same moment, 53 ships unleashing concentrated energy weapons that could have melted a small moon. The combined firepower struck the Defender's shields in a display of light so intense that the station's sensors had to dim automatically to prevent damage. When the light faded, the human ship was not only intact but somehow seemed to be glowing brighter than before. The strange mercury-like shields had absorbed the entire attack, and were now pulsing with stored energy like a battery that had just been charged. Adaptive defense matrix active, Lieutenant Adams reported with satisfaction. All incoming energy absorbed and converted. Ready to return fire. Fire, Stone ordered simply. What happened next redefined everyone's understanding of what was possible in space combat. The Defender's weapons systems activated with surgical precision, sending the absorbed energy back at the Syndicate ships with twice the original force. 3 heavy cruisers simply ceased to exist, torn apart by their own reflected firepower before their crews could even register what had happened. Dr. Chen watched from the station's medical bay, her hands pressed against the window as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. How long have humans had technology like this? She asked aloud, though no one was there to answer. The Syndicate fleet was in chaos now, their perfect formation breaking apart as captains tried to understand how their target had survived the concentrated attack and destroyed 3 ships in response. Several vessels were pulling back, their commanders clearly having second thoughts about engaging an opponent that could turn their own weapons against them. But the Defender was not finished. The massive human ship began to move forward, its engines creating distortions in space itself as it accelerated toward the enemy fleet. What followed was not so much a battle as a demonstration of what happened when superior technology met outdated tactics. The human ship's weapons were unlike anything in the Coalition arsenal. Instead of simple energy beams or projectiles, they seemed to tear holes in space itself, reaching across impossible distances to strike targets with absolute precision. Syndicate ships exploded one after another as their shields and armor proved worthless against weapons that bypassed conventional defenses entirely. Spatial torpedo launchers are showing full effectiveness, Lieutenant Adams reported, her voice filled with professional satisfaction. Enemy vessels are unable to adapt to quantum disruption patterns. Stone watched the tactical display as red dots representing enemy ships winked out one by one. The Syndicate commanders were brave enough, he had to give them that. Even as their fleet was being systematically destroyed, they continued trying to find some weakness in the human ship's defenses, some way to turn the battle in their favor. Sir, we're receiving surrender requests from 12 enemy vessels, the communications officer announced. Accept their surrender and direct them to withdraw from the system, Stone ordered. Any ship that continues hostile action will be destroyed. On Kepler Station, Danny Pierce was recording everything his sensors could detect, knowing that what he was witnessing would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. The junior communications officer had grown up believing that his species was lucky to have been accepted into the greater galactic community. But now he was watching humans demonstrate technology that made the most advanced Coalition ships look like toys. Commander, he called to Zara, I'm detecting more human ships approaching from hyperspace. Lots of them. The sensor readings showed the energy signatures of at least 20 more vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They were smaller than the Defender, but still larger and more advanced than anything the Coalition had on record for human military capabilities. Amy Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom from the children's section, filled with wonder and relief. Commander, the children want to know if the pretty lights mean we're safe now. Zara looked at the tactical display where the Syndicate fleet was either fleeing or surrendering, their siege broken by a single human ship that had appeared from nowhere, like an answer to prayers no one had dared to voice. Tell them yes, she replied, her voice soft with amazement. Tell them the humans came to help and everything is going to be fine. The battle was over, but the questions were just beginning. The evacuation shuttles from the USV Defender were like nothing anyone had ever seen before. They moved through space with the smooth grace of birds flying through air, their hulls reflecting starlight in patterns that seemed to shift and change as they approached Kepler Station. Each shuttle was large enough to carry 200 people in comfort, that exceeded most passenger liners, and they docked with the station so gently that many residents barely felt the connection. Commander Zara found herself standing in the Defender's main hangar bay 3 hours after the battle had ended, still trying to process everything she had witnessed. The human ship's interior was as impressive as its exterior, with clean white corridors that seemed to glow with their own light and technology that made Coalition starships look primitive by comparison. This is incredible, she said to Captain Stone as they Watch the steady stream of evacuees boarding the shuttles. Your medical facilities are more advanced than anything on Coalition worlds. Your engines create spatial distortions I've never seen before. How long have humans possessed capabilities like this? Stone watched a group of Vellani children being helped aboard one of the shuttles by human crew members who spoke their language perfectly. About 15 years, give or take. We started the deep space program shortly after joining the Coalition, when we realized that the galaxy was a more dangerous place than most species wanted to admit. Dr. Lisa Chen had spent the last 2 hours touring the Defender's medical section, and she looked like someone who had just discovered that everything she thought she knew about medicine was wrong. The human ship's doctors had healing technology that could repair injuries in minutes rather than weeks, and diagnostic equipment that could identify problems before symptoms even appeared. Your people have been hiding all of this? She asked Stone directly. While the rest of us struggled with outdated technology and limited resources. Not hiding, Stone replied carefully. Being careful. The galaxy has a long history of turning on species that become too powerful too quickly. We decided it was better to be underestimated than feared, until we were ready to defend ourselves properly. Jake Morrison stood near one of the shuttle bays, helping elderly Crixian miners climb aboard transport ships that would carry them to safety. His mind was still reeling from the discovery that his own species had become a galactic superpower while he was working on distant mining stations, completely unaware of the transformation happening back on Earth. Captain Stone, he said when the human commander approached, what happens now? The Coalition is going to want answers about all of this. They're going to want to know why humanity kept these advances secret. Stone looked out through the hangar bay's massive windows at the wreckage of the Syndicate fleet drifting in the distance. Most of the enemy ships had fled after their coordinated attack failed so spectacularly, but a few had stayed to surrender and were now being escorted away by smaller human vessels that had arrived as reinforcements. The Coalition will adapt, he said simply. They always do. What matters is that good people are safe and the Syndicate knows. There are consequences for attacking civilians, Amy. Rodriguez emerged from one of the shuttles carrying a young Silori child, who had been separated from her family during the evacuation. The plant-like being was scared and confused, speaking in a language that most universal translators struggled with, but Amy seemed to understand her perfectly. There you are, little flower, she said gently, using the term of endearment that Silori parents used with their children. Your family is on Shuttle 7. Let's get you back to them. Captain Vorth of the Crixian Defense Corps had been given a tour of the Defender's weapons systems, and he looked like someone who had just learned that everything he knew about military tactics was obsolete. His scales had shifted to the pale green that indicated deep thought and philosophical adjustment. Your spatial torpedoes, he said to Stone. They bypass shields entirely by attacking the fabric of space itself. Your adaptive defense matrix turns enemy weapons into your own power source. These are not improvements on existing technology. These are completely new approaches to warfare. Stone nodded. Human engineers tend to think differently than most species. We don't just try to make existing designs better. We ask whether there might be completely different ways to solve the same problems. The last shuttle loaded with evacuees departed from Kepler Station 6 hours after the battle ended, carrying away people who would spend the rest of their lives telling others about the day humans revealed themselves to be far more than anyone had imagined. The station itself was being prepared for controlled shutdown, its valuable equipment and data archives transferred to the human ships for safekeeping. Danny Pierce had been invited to serve as communications liaison between the evacuation fleet and Coalition Command, a job that mostly involved explaining to shocked officials that yes, humans really did have ships like the Defender. And no, this was not some elaborate hoax or misunderstanding. Coalition. Command wants to know about your fleet strength, he reported to Captain Stone. They're asking how many ships like the Defender exist. Stone's answer was diplomatic but clear. Enough to protect human interests and our allies. The exact numbers are classified, but I can assure the Coalition that we have no aggressive intentions toward any peaceful species. Dr. Chen stood in the Defender's observation lounge, looking back at Kepler Station as the human fleet prepared to escort the evacuees to safety. The mining platform that had been her home for 3 years now looked small and fragile against the backdrop of the gas giant's swirling clouds, a reminder of how vulnerable civilization could be in the vast darkness between stars. Where will you take us? She asked Stone. Coalition Refugee Processing Station at Centaurus Hub, he replied. It's well defended and has facilities for all the species we rescued. From there, people can choose where they want to go next. As the human fleet engaged their hyperspace drives and prepared to leave the Kepler system, Jake Morrison found himself thinking about what the galaxy would look like now that humanity had shown its true capabilities. The balance of power had shifted overnight, and every government from the Coalition to the Syndicate would be scrambling to understand what it meant. Do you think this will change things? He asked Captain Stone as they stood together on the bridge, watching the stars stretch into lines as the Defender entered hyperspace. Stone was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Change is already here, Jake. The question is whether we use it to build something better or just find new ways to repeat old mistakes. Behind them, the tactical display showed dozens of other human ships scattered throughout the galaxy, their positions marked with small green dots that represented a secret fleet that was secret no more. The age of humanity keeping its true strength hidden was over, and whatever came next would reshape the galaxy in ways that no one could predict. The rescue of Kepler Station had been just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would be told and retold across 1,000 worlds as beings everywhere learned that sometimes help really does come from the most unexpected places, carried by those who were willing to emerge from the void when others needed them most.